The day the Galactic Empire arrived, Earth was forever changed. The skies darkened as the massive fleet appeared, a seemingly endless line of ships, some as large as cities, floating silently in orbit. For most, it was the end. The news broadcasted their arrival, and panic spread like wildfire. Nations scrambled to prepare, governments issued evacuation orders, and military forces braced for an onslaught that seemed inevitable. But the Empire was not here to simply observe. They had come to conquer. From their towering warships, emissaries of the Empire transmitted their message. Humanity was now a subject of their vast empire. Earth's resources would be plundered, its inhabitants enslaved or destroyed. The galaxy, they claimed, had long since been united under the Empire's iron fist, and Earth was the next in line to be incorporated into their flawless system. What the Empire didn't know was that humanity had a unique kind of resilience. While they had no fleets of warships or advanced weapons capable of matching the Empire's massive arsenal, they had something far more dangerous, a spirit that refused to be broken. For generations, humans had fought against nature, famine, disease, and each other. They had been tested by time and adversity, and every challenge had made them stronger. The Empire's first strike came swiftly, a brutal bombardment from orbit. Cities were shattered, and millions perished in the initial assault. Yet, in the chaos, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not cower. In the shattered ruins of their cities, small pockets of resistance formed. They weren't soldiers or generals. They were ordinary people, farmers, teachers, scientists, and shopkeepers, who had only one thing in common: an unyielding drive to survive. As the Empire's ground forces descended to claim Earth's largest cities, they were met with resistance that confused them. They expected humans to run, to flee into hiding, to surrender in the face of overwhelming force. But instead, they found traps. Explosions ripped through their armored vehicles. Sabotaged equipment malfunctioned in the middle of battles. While the Empire's elite soldiers had the finest weapons and technology, they underestimated the power of human ingenuity. Every corner turned, every new city they took was fraught with surprises. Humans were unpredictable. Where the Empire relied on strict hierarchy and protocol, Earth's defenders fought without such limitations. In underground bunkers and old military installations, former soldiers and civilians alike cobbled together makeshift weapons. They used the wreckage of Empire technology, reversing alien tech, and created new forms of defense, shielding and counterattacking in ways the invaders couldn't anticipate. For the Empire, the resistance was maddening. Their intelligence reports insisted that humans were nothing more than primitive creatures, incapable of standing against an empire that had wiped out countless species. Yet here they were, caught in a war of attrition they hadn't expected. Every time the Empire thought they had broken the human resolve, new groups of fighters emerged from the shadows. The humans' resilience had taken the Empire by surprise, but it was only the beginning. The leaders of the Empire began to question. If these humans were so fragile, why were they so difficult to crush? Something about this species was different, something their arrogance had failed to recognize. And as the first few days of battle passed, the Empire's confidence slowly began to erode. Humanity had been written off, but the reality was far different. The fight for Earth had just begun. The Empire's initial plan had been simple: overwhelm Earth with their superior forces, break their will in a matter of days, and claim the planet as another jewel in their galactic crown. But as weeks turned into months, they found themselves mired in a brutal and unforgiving war that didn't look like it would end anytime soon. The Empire's commanders were perplexed. Every time they thought they had crushed the last spark of resistance, it flared back to life. The humans, for all their technological shortcomings, fought with an unrelenting ferocity that was unlike anything the Empire had encountered. Their cities had been decimated, their armies shattered, but still, they'd resisted. The alien invaders had anticipated a quick surrender, but instead, humanity adapted in ways they never thought possible. One key factor that made human resistance so difficult to defeat was their ability to innovate under pressure. The Empire's advanced weaponry, designed to wipe out entire armies with a single strike, was countered by human ingenuity in the form of makeshift weapons, guerrilla tactics, and creative solutions born of desperation. Humans had a gift for thinking outside the box, finding weaknesses in the Empire's high-tech forces and exploiting them. A prime example was the sabotage of the Empire's energy shields. Though these shields were invulnerable to most conventional weapons, human engineers, working in secret, discovered a flaw. The shield's energy matrix could be destabilized by a specific frequency of electromagnetic pulses. Armed with this knowledge, the Resistance quickly began using improvised EMP devices to temporarily disable the Empire's defenses. When the shields faltered, human fighters stormed the Empire's bases, causing severe damage to key infrastructure. The Empire's arrogance played a significant role in their underestimation of humanity. They believed that their technology was the key to their supremacy. Their warships, armored to withstand anything the humans could throw at them, were more than capable of reducing entire cities to rubble with devastating firepower. But humanity's ability to adapt, combined with their sheer will to survive, made their technology more effective than the Empire ever anticipated. As the Empire continued to tighten its grip, the humans began to fight back with a growing sense of unity. Previously divided nations set aside their differences and began to collaborate, pooling their resources to combat the invaders. Where once there had been bickering over land and power, there was now a single common goal: to drive the Empire off their planet. In every corner of the world, humans launched coordinated attacks, using both traditional military tactics and unconventional methods. From small villages to major cities, resistance cells were established, disrupting supply lines and launching guerrilla raids on Empire installations. As the fight spread across Earth, the Empire found itself stretched thin, unable to control the vast territories it had taken so easily in the beginning. At the same time, the psychological toll on the Empire's soldiers was beginning to show. They had been told they were superior, that their victory over Earth would be inevitable. But the longer the war dragged on, the more disillusioned they became. The alien soldiers, once confident and well-disciplined, began to falter. Rumors spread throughout the ranks, whispers of defections, of soldiers questioning their mission, of the Empire's failure to break humanity's spirit. And yet, despite all of this, the Empire's leadership refused to acknowledge that they were facing anything more than a brief resistance, a mere nuisance. The idea of humans being a true threat was laughable. But as the weeks wore on, that laughable resistance became something more. The Empire's commanders, despite their confidence, were starting to realize that humanity was not an easy target. They had underestimated the depth of human resilience and the vastness of their capacity for innovation. This was no longer a war between advanced technology and a primitive species. It had become a battle of ideologies, a clash between an empire that demanded submission and a species that refused to kneel. In the quiet moments of the night, as their warships hovered above the burning cities of Earth, the Empire's commanders couldn't help but wonder, had they made a terrible mistake? The war had dragged on longer than anyone had predicted, and the Empire was beginning to show signs of vulnerability. It was a vulnerability they refused to acknowledge, but the evidence was irrefutable. The human resistance had grown, not just in numbers, but in strength and sophistication. Their resolve had hardened, and the small scattered groups of guerrilla fighters had transformed into a formidable force. The Empire's command structure, once confident and well-oiled, was starting to crack under the strain. Then came the event that would change the course of the war. The unthinkable happened. In a daring and seemingly impossible mission, a small group of human soldiers managed to infiltrate one of the Empire's most heavily guarded bases. Hidden deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, this base housed one of the Empire's largest and most powerful warships, an imposing, nearly indestructible flagship that was supposed to be Earth's doom. The ship was equipped with devastating energy weapons capable of leveling, and the loss of their flagship sent ripples of panic through the Empire's leadership. They had underestimated humanity before, but this blow, this bold, audacious strike, was a wake-up call. They had believed their technological superiority would be enough to quash any resistance, but they hadn't accounted for human ingenuity, resourcefulness, and sheer tenacity. As the Empire scrambled to regroup, something unexpected began to unfold on Earth. The human resistance, bolstered by the success of their strike against the flagship, was rapidly evolving. They were no longer just reacting to the Empire's actions. They were now anticipating them, countering every move with strategy and precision. The most significant shift was in the way humans were using the technology they had scavenged from the Empire's wreckage. In the early days of the war, Earth scientists had struggled to understand alien technology, but the constant exposure to it had led to unexpected breakthroughs. Engineers, physicists, and even civilian inventors began working together, creating innovations that defied the Empire's expectations. One of the most notable developments was humanity's creation of a counter-shield system. The Empire's shields, once thought impenetrable, were now vulnerable to a specific frequency of electromagnetic pulses that human scientists had discovered. The counter-shield technology was not as sophisticated as the Empire's, but it was enough to level the playing field. Human fighters could now take on Empire forces without being immediately obliterated by their impenetrable energy barriers. But that wasn't all. The humans began reverse engineering Empire weaponry, adapting it for their own use. What was once considered an invincible fleet of warships now faced opposition from advanced human-built countermeasures. New weapons were developed, high-tech pulse rifles, energy cannons, and even drones that could disable the Empire's vehicles and ships. The Empire's advantage, built on centuries of advanced technology, was slipping away. Meanwhile, on the ground, humanity's ability to fight with sheer grit and determination became their most potent weapon. The Empire's forces, though technologically superior, lacked the adaptability and creative thinking that humans displayed in every battle. Where the Empire relied on rigid formations and predictable tactics, the human resistance fought in ways that couldn't be anticipated. A group of soldiers might seem cornered, only to emerge from an unexpected location, launching a counterattack from a completely different angle. Small teams of human fighters would infiltrate Empire bases, sabotage critical systems, and then vanish without a trace, leaving the Empire's command structure scrambling. The Empire, for all its technological might, was beginning to realize that fighting humans wasn't just about firepower. It was about understanding how they thought, how they adapted, and how they fought with everything they had. The human advantage wasn't their strength in numbers or superior weapons. It was their mind. Where the Empire had built its empire on conquest and destruction, humans fought with something deeper, something that could never be captured by technology alone: their unbreakable spirit. In the midst of all this, human morale soared. The victories, small at first, then bigger with each passing week, were a testament to humanity's resilience. More and more soldiers, engineers, and civilians were joining the resistance. The idea of victory wasn't just a dream anymore. It was becoming a reality. Even as cities lay in ruin and millions of lives had been lost, the human spirit remained unshaken. They knew what they were fighting for now: the survival of their species, the preservation of their way of life, and the chance to prove to the galaxy that no empire, no matter how mighty, could crush humanity. The Empire's leadership, once so confident, now found themselves facing a new reality. The human resistance was no longer a ragtag group of fighters. They had become an organized, well-equipped, and highly motivated force. What had once seemed like a futile rebellion was now a full-fledged war that the Empire could no longer ignore. And for the first time, the leaders of the Empire started to question their superiority. Could the humans really defeat them? Could this tiny, insignificant species, whose planet they had once dismissed as a trivial prize, really bring the Empire to its knees? The humans had shown the galaxy one thing for certain: The Empire had underestimated them. And now, the real fight was just beginning. The Empire's leadership had always prided itself on its overwhelming power. They had crushed countless civilizations across the galaxy, often without breaking a sweat. But now, they were facing something they had never encountered before, a species that refused to bend, that fought back not just with weapons, but with a relentless drive to survive. The humans, in their desperation, had transformed their weaknesses into strengths, and now the Empire was beginning to feel the weight of their miscalculations. For months, the Empire had maintained a posture of superiority, confident that their technological advancements would eventually crush Earth's spirit. Their warships, nearly indestructible. Their soldiers, genetically enhanced and equipped with the finest armor and weapons. Their resources, vast beyond imagination. Yet, despite all of this, they had failed to anticipate the persistence and adaptability of humanity. Each battle left the Empire's forces more exhausted, more demoralized. Where they had once expected quick victories, they now found themselves bogged down in an unending war. The turning point came when a strategic operation designed to wipe out a major human resistance stronghold ended in disaster. The Empire had underestimated the tenacity of the humans yet again. A combined force of Earth's military leaders and guerrilla fighters had set a trap, one that the Empire's commanders, blinded by arrogance, had walked straight into. The Empire's fleet launched a full-scale assault on the resistance base, expecting to obliterate it in a single strike. But as they descended on the location, their forces were ambushed. Mines, explosives, and energy shields activated at just the right moment, knocking out the Empire's communications and disrupting their advance. The humans had used the Empire's own technology against them, making their war machines turn on their own commanders. The result was chaos. Empire soldiers, caught in a disorganized retreat, became easy targets for the coordinated strikes of human forces. By the time the dust settled, the Empire had lost more than 25% of its fleet in the operation. It was a disaster, one that shattered their confidence. The Empire's once unbreakable grip on Earth was weakening. Their strategy had always relied on brute force, but now they were finding that no matter how advanced their technology, they were still facing an enemy that refused to yield. The loss sent shockwaves through the Empire's leadership. They had never expected to be outwitted by a species they considered inferior. Now, the question on every officer's mind was, how much longer could the Empire hold on? The humans, it seemed, had an uncanny ability to turn every defeat into an opportunity, every loss into a lesson learned. While the Empire's leaders argued and reassessed their strategies, their soldiers' morale continued to deteriorate. Those on the front lines, once so confident in their mission, were now questioning everything. Was Earth really worth the bloodshed? Were they truly facing a species that could never be beaten? It was clear that the humans were no longer the defenseless, primitive species the Empire had believed them to be. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a force that had the ability to fight on multiple fronts, using both strategy and innovation. The galaxy's most feared empire was now stuck in a war that was slowly turning against them, and their leaders were beginning to panic. What was once a matter of conquest had become a matter of survival. Meanwhile, on Earth, the mood shifted. The human resistance had just scored one of the greatest victories of the war, and the world responded with a renewed sense of hope. The message was clear: Earth could win this war. The days of fear were over. The Empire's reign was coming to an end, and humanity would be the ones to bring it down. The resistance, fueled by the growing belief that victory was possible, launched an unprecedented counteroffensive. Coordinated attacks, both on land and in space, struck deep into the Empire's most vulnerable territories. Human soldiers, once outmatched by alien forces, were now fighting with renewed vigor and advanced weaponry. The war, which had seemed unwinnable just months earlier, was now entering a new phase, one where humanity was not just fighting for survival, but fighting for victory. And the Empire. They had underestimated humanity. They had built an empire on arrogance and conquest, but now That very empire was crumbling. The false confidence they had once held was shattered, and with it, the illusion of invincibility. The tides of war had shifted. Where once the empire had been unstoppable, confident in their immense power, they were now reeling from defeat. Humanity had achieved the unthinkable. They had outsmarted the empire, forced their enemies into retreat, and shattered the illusion of invincibility the empire had built around itself. The days of desperation were now behind them, replaced by the unshakable belief that victory was within reach. The human resistance, fueled by a sense of purpose and unity, pressed forward with relentless determination. No longer fighting from the shadows, they began launching large-scale offensives against the Empire's key positions. Cities that had once been occupied by the Empire were liberated one by one, and human forces began to infiltrate deeper into the territories the invaders had once considered impenetrable. From the deepest underground bunkers to the highest orbital stations, humanity was everywhere. One of the most significant blows came when Earth's united forces managed to capture one of the Empire's critical command hubs, a heavily fortified station located on Mars. The station, known as the Nexus, was the nerve center for the Empire's operations on Earth. It controlled everything from fleet movements to communication between Empire commanders. If the Resistance could hold it, they could cripple the Empire's entire logistical network. The operation to capture the Nexus was a carefully planned affair. For weeks, the Resistance had secretly built up resources and coordinated their efforts. In the dead of night, hundreds of human warships descended upon the station, striking without warning. Using the technology the humans had reversed engineered, they bypassed the station's defenses, launching precise strikes that disabled its outer perimeter. The Empire's forces, caught off guard, scrambled to mount a defense. But it was too late. The humans had already infiltrated the station's core, and within hours, they had gained control of the most important communications hub the Empire had on Earth. The impact was immediate and devastating. Without the Nexus, the Empire's chain of command was fractured. Communications between commanders were severed, and their fleet movements were thrown into chaos. The human resistance, which had once been scattered and disorganized, now had a strategic advantage, an advantage that could shift the war entirely in their favor. News of the victory spread quickly, reigniting the fires of hope across the planet. People who had long since given up began to fight once more. Civilians in once occupied cities rallied, joining the resistance in ways they never thought possible. The capture of the Nexus had not just been a tactical success, it had sent a powerful message. The Empire was no longer in control. Humanity was taking back its world, and nothing could stop them. As the humans pushed forward, the Empire began to show cracks in its leadership. The once proud commanders, who had believed their mission was flawless, were now questioning their positions. The Emperor himself, a distant figure who had never understood the fierce will of the species he sought to dominate, was growing desperate. The very foundation of the Empire, the idea that they were an unbeatable force, was crumbling before their eyes. And as the Empire floundered, humanity began to rise, not as a fractured and divided species, but as a united force, determined to reclaim everything that had been lost. But the road ahead was far from easy. The Empire still held powerful assets, clandestine weapons, vast fleets, and the unwavering loyalty of many of its soldiers. But one thing had become abundantly clear: the Empire was not invincible. And the humans, driven by a force more powerful than any weapon, were not going to stop until they had reclaimed their world. The final stages of the war were drawing near, and the question on everyone's mind was no longer if humanity would win, but when. The war had stretched on for what seemed like an eternity, but now the end was near. The Empire, once an unstoppable force, was crumbling under the weight of its own arrogance and the relentless will of humanity. With the capture of the Nexus, the balance of power had decisively tipped in humanity's favor. What had started as a desperate rebellion was now a full-scale war of liberation, and the Empire had no choice but to face the fact that it was losing. Despite their fractured command structure, the Empire was far from defeated. The remnants of their forces still held key strongholds, vast space stations in orbit, underground facilities on Earth, and well-defended outposts scattered across the galaxy. These bastions of Empire power remained heavily fortified, but they were no longer untouchable. The human resistance had learned to strike fast and hard, and now they were on the offensive, determined to bring down the Empire for good. The final phase of the war began with a series of coordinated strikes on the Empire's remaining strongholds. Human forces, fueled by their triumphs and united like never before, pushed deep into enemy territory. Every battle brought them closer to victory, but with each step forward, the risk grew. The Empire, desperate and cornered, unleashed its most devastating weapons: cloaked warships, planetary bombardments, and the deadliest of all, the weapons of mass destruction that had once been used to wipe out entire civilizations. The Empire was ready to do anything to crush the resistance and maintain its dominance. But humanity had already proven that it could face down even the most impossible odds. With the newly developed countermeasures, the human fleet was able to block most of the Empire's energy weapons, and their tactics grew even more sophisticated. The once loose coalition of nations now stood as a singular force, led by the brightest minds and fiercest warriors the world had to offer. Every attack was a well-orchestrated effort, and their command was now as unified as it had ever been. Captain Elena Reyes, now a symbol of the human resistance, led the final assault on the Empire's most fortified base, an immense fortress located on the moon of a distant planet, surrounded by a fleet of elite warships. The Empire had staked everything on this stronghold, believing it to be impenetrable. It was here that they had hidden their most powerful weapon, a massive super weapon capable of annihilating entire cities with a single strike. The Empire believed it was their trump card, the key to breaking humanity's spirit once and for all. But the resistance had other plans. Reyes, alongside a coalition of human leaders and warriors, spearheaded the attack. They struck from multiple directions, using decoys, feints, and coordinated space battles to confuse and divide the Empire's forces. Human engineers had managed to reverse engineer a new form of energy weapon capable of disabling the Empire's superweapon before it could be deployed. A well-timed strike on the weapon's core set off a chain reaction, disabling the entire base and leaving it in ruins. The Empire's leadership, shattered by the loss of their ultimate weapon, was left with nothing. The remaining loyalist forces, demoralized and disoriented, began to collapse. The last bastion of Empire power had been dismantled, and humanity had proven that it was no longer just a force to be reckoned with. It was a force that could reshape the galaxy itself. With the fall of the superweapon, the Empire's last hope for victory evaporated. The human resistance, now emboldened and united, pushed onward. The final battles were brutal, but the Empire's forces, exhausted and fragmented, were no match for the overwhelming power of the human will. Across Earth and beyond, the last remnants of the Empire's forces began to surrender. And as the final warships fell from the sky, humanity stood victorious. The final battle was over. The remnants of the Empire's warships drifted silently through space, their once proud banners now reduced to smoldering wreckage. Earth, scared by years of occupation, was slowly beginning to heal. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had defeated the Empire, a force that had once seemed invincible, and reclaimed their world. The war was over, but the scars it left would last forever. In the aftermath, the human resistance, now a global force, began to rebuild what had been lost. Entire cities that had been razed in the conflict were painstakingly reconstructed, and the survivors of the war worked together to restore Earth to its former glory. But this time, the world was different. No longer divided by borders or ideologies, humanity had united under a single banner, the banner of freedom. The days of division, War and oppression were behind them. They had come together, fought for a common cause, and emerged victorious. Captain Elena Reyes, who had once been a symbol of the resistance, now stood as a symbol of hope and resilience for all of humanity. She, alongside other leaders from across the globe, helped guide Earth into its new era. It was a time of rebuilding, but also of rethinking what it meant to be human. The experience of fighting against an overwhelming force had changed them all. The human race was no longer just fighting for survival, it was fighting for a future that was theirs to shape. But while Earth began to recover, the consequences of their victory rippled across the galaxy. The Empire, once a dominant force that controlled countless worlds, was now no more than a shadow of its former self. Its leadership had fractured, and its once mighty fleets lay in ruins. The galaxy, which had once trembled under the Empire's iron fist, now found itself in a new era. An era where humanity had proved that even the most powerful empire could be brought to its knees. In the days that followed, delegations from the various planets and star systems that had been under the Empire's control began to make contact with Earth. Some came to offer their support, eager to join the new coalition that had emerged from the ashes of war. Others came seeking help to rebuild their shattered worlds, as many had suffered under the Empire's oppressive rule. Earth's leaders, now united, began to form a new interstellar alliance, a beacon of hope and cooperation in a galaxy once dominated by fear and subjugation. This was not a simple rebuilding of what was lost, but the creation of something new. The humans, who had faced